Good evening and welcome to Frontline Access to Maccabi Canada. I'd once like to again thank producer Jared and the virtual JC for hosting us. Now it is my extreme pleasure to bring in Kevin Abrams, the Vice President of Football Operations and Assistant General Manager of the New York Football Giants.
How are you there? It's good to be here with you.
Kevin, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
First question, you're in the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic. How are you doing? How's your family doing?
We're doing great. Thanks for asking. We've been 3 months into it. First 2 months we spent here at home. The draft kept me busy. My wife works in the markets, so that kept her busy. And our kids, thankfully, are self-starters. So they stayed on top of their schoolwork while we were far from great examples of how to parent during a pandemic. But we did our best, and thankfully they did all the heavy lifting for themselves. So we did well. And then a couple weeks ago, we took the opportunity to get out of our little box in the sky here and took the kids out to a house on Long Island so we could spend some time with some fresh air, vitamin D, swimming pool, the like. And they'd worked so hard to stay on top of everything that they certainly deserved it. So we're having a nice little break from the city.
Awesome. We'll have to bring you back for another stream on parenting during the pandemic.
Sure.
So we'll get to the draft in a minute because I know you just mentioned that, but I want to start with your second full season in the NFL. The Giants make it Super Bowl 35 in Tampa, but you guys lost. Take me through that, the game and the emotional roller coaster of being in a Super Bowl.
Well, I mean, my first year with the Giants, we were going through a lot of transition. We had a new quarterback that we were bringing along slowly in Kerry Collins. Year two, he was going to start the year as a starter, and we felt like we might that might help us certainly in the win column to some degree. We didn't necessarily think it would get us to the Super Bowl, but we'd had an active free agency that offseason as well, addressing the offensive line in particular with some veterans like Dusty Ziegler, Lomas Brown, and Glenn Parker. So we felt we had to address some real needs. We thought a quarterback in his second year would help a team that had missed the playoffs the year before. We thought we'd contend to get into the playoffs, and we managed to get in. We had a nice run. We had some terrific games in the playoffs, but unfortunately, we were overmatched. We got to the Super Bowl against an extraordinarily good Baltimore Ravens team. But it was great to be there. It was interesting to be there so early, year two of my tenure with the Giants. But it was a great experience. It was a miserable day, but a great experience.
So you must have learned a lot from that season, the playoff experience, and making it to the Super Bowl. How did that help you in building the team moving forward? And of course, 8 years later, and then 12 years after that, so 4 years after the second one, you're in the Super Bowl again. So how did that transition to the future success of the team?
Well, again, that was my first off season with the Giants. That between year one and year two. And it was a year that we sort of broke from our normal operating procedures and got really involved in free agency. We had added Michael Barrow as well. And it was interesting to go through the process, the recruitment, the negotiation, the cap management, all involved with making big investments into free agents coming from other clubs. And also the time it takes to assimilate these new players into your program. And it took some guys longer than others. Defensive players seem to take a little bit longer than offensive guys do to fit in, and that was the case with Michael Barrow, who was playing fantastically lights out for us once he got acclimated. And then the offensive line guys, they were all vets. They knew what they were doing, and they stepped right in and made a big difference for us. So we sort of learned a little bit about the free agency process, and then what you can expect. And then it was also a good lesson in sort of mixing and matching youth and vet experience on your roster, knowing that if you don't have some, that might be a time to go and look for some elsewhere.
So you just mentioned before about the salary and bringing in some free agents. You were hired as a salary cap specialist. So take us through the people that aren't really used to the NFL. How does the salary cap work, and what does a specialist do?
Well, I mean, the fact that I got into the salary cap analyst was fortunate for me because I'd always wanted to be on the team building side of a football program. Ideally, I thought maybe I'd try and go through the scouting ranks, but those opportunities just weren't presenting themselves for me. But I did, after going to grad school and having a lot of internships in and around the NFL in business operations, corporate relations, PR, those sorts of departments. But none of those things were what I really wanted to do. And then I had an opportunity to go work at the league office in the management council, which handled all things collectively bargained, labor, and the salary cap. And a 3-month internship turned into 9 because they were losing so many people from their office to go to clubs to manage their salary caps, that it gave me really good experience and an opportunity to get great experience, working with the cap, interpreting the rules, and speaking to clubs on a regular basis and going over every single contract that came in. So I went from not really knowing what the cap was just a couple of years prior to getting a really foundation of quality cap skills that would allow me to be a candidate if cap jobs opened up around the league. The Giants had a need. My boss put my name forward and was fortunate to get the job. And that got me into football operations, which then opened up opportunities for me to get involved in personnel and pro college scouting, and now everything else that goes into football operations. But it was the cap that allowed me to get my foot in the door.
That's awesome. So when you're structuring a contract, you're bringing in veterans or you're signing a rookie, how does the cap play a role?
Well, it's a budget like any other. It's not terribly complex. It's not much more than one Excel sheet that you have to balance every day. But there are some rules. It's kind of like a very, very minor tax code, but you have to know what the rules are, and you certainly can, delay counting money against your cap in the current year if that's what you want to do. Obviously, it's like credit card spending. It's not exactly how you want to go about managing your cap. We try and take a position where we'd like to get our take our hits as early as possible so that you don't have long-term liability if a player has to come off your roster. So really, it's good cap health. Once you have it, it's easy to keep it. Once you don't have it, you're desperately trying to get back to good cap health. So we try and preach to our coaches and our ownership that our goal is to always be in good cap health, so you never have to make decisions because of the salary cap.
Fair enough. So because you have some teams that I guess would try and spend at the cap, and some teams also spend probably is the cap floor or very a minimum. Is there a way that a strategy that you use to make sure that you stay consistent every year?
Yeah, I mean, every dollar you spend is going to count against the cap. Now, it might not be this year, but at some point it will count. So you're not going to avoid counting dollars against the cap. So in our opinion, the best way to go about it is limit the amount of amortized bonuses you have, which are stuck on your cap in future years, no matter what happens with the player. You don't want to have that. That's the liability I was talking about. And we try to have a flat cap count in our contracts. So the NHL, they just apply the average of each contract to every year of that contract under the cap. In us, we can structure contracts so that we can stagger the cap hit over the years. It might climb, it might decrease over the term of the contract. Our preference is to have it pretty flat. Every year we want the cap count to look like the average. So as the cap goes up, you're automatically getting some kind of cap benefit from it. If we can, we'd love to front load deals, but that the more you put in the current year means that you'll have less opportunities to use the cap to acquire players in the current year. But there's a healthy balance. Ideally, you want to have your cash expenditure and your cap counting to be roughly the same as you go along throughout a contract.
For some people, it might not sound interesting, but it's fascinating to me. So people that are waiting for the Eli Manning question, the Super Bowl questions, they're coming. But I just love the inner workings of a football front office.
Mm-hmm.
So I just brought him up. Eli Manning did recently retire. And an interesting trivia question is that he was actually drafted by the Chargers and traded to the Giants. So take us through that process on draft day. It seems like a rare trade that now we can look back and both teams won. So what was involved in bringing him to the Giants? And yeah.
Well, it was a long process. We had interest in Eli from the fall, doing all of our college scouting work. We knew he was our #1 rated player and quarterback. Once the season was over, we knew we were picking 4, and we knew there wasn't much of a chance that we would have an opportunity to get him there. We also knew that San Diego picking first was in the market for a quarterback, and if they saw the board the same way we did, then obviously Eli would be gone. So we were preparing for, what are we going to do if we're picking 4 and Eli's not there? And we had our second, third, and fourth options just so that we knew, and also some options in case we moved back, which was actually something that we had arranged to do at a point in time where we didn't think we'd be able to get Eli at #4. And then over time, during the pre-draft process, we had conversations with the teams in front of us, including the Chargers, about what it would take to move up. Their position, for the most part, was that they didn't want to move back. They knew who they wanted, and they were going to take him 1, and it was Eli. Certainly, things came out that they were having trouble convincing him to go to San Diego if they did take him. and the dialogue continued. And then as the draft got very close, I don't know how many days in advance, but there was finally some substantive conversations about what a deal would look like. We were pretty close. Really, the last sticking point was whether or not we would include OCU Manura, who was coming off a rookie year where he hadn't played much, but he certainly had flashed enough to pique our interest as well as the Chargers. They wanted him included in the deal. Of course, my boss at the time refused to include him. And then ultimately him and the Chargers, they were able to figure out what the rest of the deal would look like. And they picked Eli at 1 because the deal hadn't been finalized yet. We couldn't agree to terms yet. We had about 30, 45 minutes between their selection and when we would run up, our time on the clock would run out. We decided to take Phillip Rivers. We were hoping that would be a piece that would encourage them to want to do business with us still and make a deal. And thankfully it did. And Phillip became a Charger and Eli became a Giant.
So you mentioned that Eli was a bit instrumental in not really being fond of playing in San Diego at the time. How often does a player influence a team, whether they want to take him or not?
I haven't seen it very often in the draft. In my 21 years in the league, I can't think of another example, although I might be missing one that's very obvious. Nothing comes to mind. But there certainly have been examples of veteran players that wanted out of an organization or wanted to go to another organization or both, and would try and encourage or ask for their current team to make that trade. So it's not uncommon for players to try to get out or go to somewhere, even though they might not have the rights to get there on their own through free agency, but it does happen from time to time.
So take us back to that draft day. You mentioned that there was 45 minutes in between the pick and that you were still working behind the scenes. So what's a typical draft day like? Is all your research, all the scouting, all the tape, is that ready to go? And are you just picking people off in order? You see they're gone, you move to the next one, or is there always still jockeying, still indecision in the room?
We know that the better job we do in advance. If we were having a lot of dialogue on draft day about who to take, then we probably didn't do a great job in our work leading up to the draft. But the years that we seem to feel like we've had the best meetings and the best conversations, there's not a lot of dialogue on draft day when you're just picking at your spot because you've had the conversations already. You've anticipated what the groups might be that you'll be considering at the same point in time, and you've gotten all the feedback you need from scouts and coaches and all the decision makers. And we've already decided that if it's these 2 players, who are we taking? Or if these 4 players, in what order would we prefer to have them so that we know? Because you don't want to be making those decisions while you're under the gun of having the clock ticking down. You'd like to have that decision made in advance. The real work on draft day is when you're fielding phone calls from other clubs and deciding whether or not to move up, move down. What's the risk of moving back? What's the price of moving up? And those conversations, which you have to happen in sometimes very condensed periods of time, and you have to make decisions quickly. But that's the fun part of the business.
So this year was also a unique draft. Usually you have team visits and you have organized practices at colleges during the months leading up to the draft, but that didn't happen. So how did you go about scouting this year and preparing?
Well, we had all of our fall scouting done, so that was good. And we also had the benefit of going to the All-Star games in January, and we had the Combine. So we got a lot of the work that you typically do done. What we didn't have was pro days. You didn't have as many in-person visits or any in-person visits at our facility, which those are tremendously valuable. So you were missing some very important information. Some players, if they didn't work out at the Combine because there were no pro days, they did not get a chance to work out for clubs, which in some cases meant that you were operating with less than a full complement of information. So you had to augment. You had to figure out ways to get some information on what kind of athlete these kids are, and background information was a little tougher to get because you didn't have them right in front of you as often as you would have. You didn't have as much face-to-face interactions with them, but we did Zooms, we did phone calls, we did as much background work as we could. And I think what we found for us was, we have a new coaching staff, so we knew that this was not that there's ever an ideal time for a pandemic, obviously, but to have limited access to the prospects and a shortened lead up to the draft in terms of how much work you can do, or at least the work that you typically do. We knew we had to go a little bit extra to make sure that we were going to be as prepared as possible, knowing that we were trying to do this with a new coaching staff, and our coaches are a big part of our evaluation process. So I think the fact that we all knew that going in really did get everyone, without having to be asked, to sort of laser focus Know there was going to be some imperfections in the process because it was one that we were making up on the fly. But I think that our IT and our data and our innovative staff, they came up with solutions to every problem we had, and we were able to really mimic what our draft process normally would be like in person, even though our scouts were spread out all over the country, and that our interactions with the players were limited to Zooms and phone calls, and that on draft day we were not sitting across the table from each other. We were all in separate locations, again, across the country. And I don't know that I can think of an example where we suffered because of it, and that's a testament to the work done by all the people behind the scenes. It was really an interesting collaborative effort, and some people that don't normally get a lot of credit certainly deserve some in this case. And we think we had a strong draft because of it. We'll find out in about a year and a half, but we certainly think that the board fell well for us, and we felt very prepared for everything that came our way. So it was a really interesting experience, and I think we learned a lot from it too, because there will be things we borrowed from this process that we'll incorporate into our process going forward.
Interesting. Do you think there are players that will have slipped under the radar because teams like the Giants weren't able to make those last minute visits or connect with all the Division II or the lower tier Division I schools?
I think there will be some kids that might have popped up on people's radars because they were able to attend pro days at larger schools. So some small school kids that maybe they wouldn't have gotten many scouts to go to their pro day, but if they can get to a bigger program and attend that day when there's more teams in attendance, then certainly that normally would help them. And maybe that didn't happen for some kids this year. I also think that smaller school kids probably suffered a bit, and that teams, whether it was intentional or unintentional, probably operate a little bit more conservatively, and they might have chosen more sure things coming from bigger programs, known commodities, as opposed to taking some of those small school players from smaller schools from lower levels of competition as early as maybe they would have if they'd had more exposure to them.
Fair enough. So we have a couple questions that came in on Daniel Jones, but before we get to more recent drafts, I just want to touch on the scouting combine for a minute. We see these drills, 40-yard dash, vertical leaps, all these numbers come in. And also there's the Wonderlic test. How much of importance do you guys put on these individual tests? And because to be honest, a 40-yard dash, when is a player actually starting and stopping 40 yards directly in a game? Same thing with a vertical leap. I mean, how often is that seen in a game situation? How much importance do you put on those?
Well, they're a piece of the puzzle. They're a data point, and it's considered like everything else. For some positions, some metrics are more important than others. We take it all for how we value it. Every club probably values all these different data points differently. We kind of look at each of these data points as something to cross-reference what we thought we saw when we watched the player live or on film. So if a player had a 40 time that was fast or slow for his position, we'll cross-check that against something as simple as how our scouts felt he played. Did he play fast? Did he play slow? What kind of play speed grade did they give him? And when there are discrepancies between how they actually performed in a testing environment versus how they play, then that just means let's do a little bit more work on them and make sure that we've got them identified as a fast football player or not. To use a very simple example, same thing with play strength and bench press, or explosiveness and vertical and broad jumps, and quickness and athletic ability, and how they tested on all the shuttles and cone drills. So there is a correlation. It's not always perfect, but it is good to know that when you're taking a player that doesn't have some of the testing and measurables that typically plays in a league, that you should know that you're betting on an outlier. You should know that what you're expecting of this player isn't consistent with what history would tell you that a player with that testing background would indicate that he's going to be. Doesn't mean that you pass on him. It just means that you better know when you're believing in your instinct and what you saw versus what the player tested as. And that happens all the time, but you just need to know when you're making that decision. So all that information is very important. I think some of those drills are a bit antiquated, but what they are drills that have been done forever and ever. So you have a big database of very apples and apples data to compare what the next year's class is going to do when they do the same drills. Are they the best drills to do? No, and we could probably tweak them a little bit and certainly take advantage of newer technologies to get a better evaluation out of the tests that we perform. But we do have this huge database of information that it would be a shame not to use it and have that as a point to compare how players are doing in the same drills going forward.
Fair enough. Makes sense. So Facebook is blowing up now, and so is YouTube. Daniel Jones, you drafted him six overall. It's obviously too early to tell how his career is going to turn out, but replacing a franchise quarterback with him. So, what did you think about him? What was the thought process going into Daniel Jones, and how do you feel he'll turn out?
Well, we're very excited to have him. We thought he had a really, really good first year. And it wasn't an easy environment. And when you're replacing a legend, and it's not like that legend had left the building. I mean, it was not everyone could have handled that. And that was part of what appealed to us about Daniel. We had been looking for a couple of years, knowing that Eli was going to play forever. We had spent a lot of time evaluating quarterbacks from the last few draft classes, and there were a lot of great options. Um, and it wasn't being critical of those other options that we didn't take them. We just had, players at other positions that we liked, or um, there was just something about those players, as exceptional as they might be. We just didn't know that New York was the place for them for one reason or another. With Daniel, we just felt like this is a kid that had all the talent, intangibles, and we really thought that New York, which isn't for everybody, we think he can handle it. We'll find out over time, but so far, all the returns have been positive. He's mature, he's smart, he gets it. And one thing we did like, and it's a bit uncanny how much he's like Eli, that it's a bit of a punchline in our building. But the fact that he does remind us of Eli, the way he carries himself and approaches the game and approaches his work, and the kind of teammate that he is. I mean, how could you not love that about the kid? So we're excited about him, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what he does in year two. I wish he'd had a proper normal off season, because this is typically where players make a big jump. But I think he's the kind of kid that will get the most out of the off season that he's had, and I can't wait to see how he does in this new system that we're playing with.
So this was a unique offseason. Thank you for bringing it up. How are players training? How are players attending the virtual organized team activities? How have they been preparing for an upcoming season, which, from what we know, is still going to happen as scheduled?
It's been unique, and it's been a challenge. Every day there's been different challenges that we've had to sort of address about working virtually and remotely. But I think that our coaches have really embraced what they can do through technology as a teaching tool. While we don't have hands on the players, and they're not in our weight room, and we can't get on the field with them, we can do a lot of work with them. And they've been really intentional. They've really, in the short amounts of time that we had to work with them each day, they've gotten the most out of it. There has been a lot of wasted time. Everything's had a purpose. Some of it's been as much life skills and professional growth conversations as it has about X's and O's. But what's been really impressive is how well, kind of like what I said about our draft process, we were able to mimic what we would do if we were all together in the building. I wouldn't say that we've mimicked it, because it's so different from being in a classroom and on the field and in the weight room together. But the content has been so solid. I mean, every meeting that I've been in has been so engaged. The players have done a great job of, it'd be easy to not pay full attention. It would be easy not to be fully engaged. It would be easy not to get the most out of this off season, because there's such a good built-in excuse. And I really get the sense that our players have not done that one bit. Our coaches have been outstanding. They're introducing new systems, and it's important, and it's been terrific. The results I think that we've been getting so far. Obviously we'll really find out how we did when we get on the field, but it's been fascinating to watch, and it's been really encouraging to see how well it's gone so far.
Speaking about getting on the field, Jeremy Friedman says, first of all, thank you for doing the interview. How about them Chiefs?
Mm-hmm.
And what is your best sense at this point about whether the season will start scheduled at Arrowhead Stadium, Chiefs versus Texans on the 10th, and whether fans will be allowed to attend?
I'm sorry, you cut out a little bit, the last part of that question. Can you say that again?
Jeremy wants to know if you think the season will start as scheduled and whether fans will be allowed to attend.
This is a good question. We haven't gotten a lot of information about when we'll resume training and playing. We've gotten a lot of information about everything else. Staff are now back in the building. We're making plans for every possible start date that could ultimately be the decision. But we need to be ready to go tomorrow if we have a period where we ramp up so players can get the strength and conditioning in that they haven't been able to do so far. We need to be ready to go tomorrow if that's what the league and the union decide, and the medical community. If they decide that this needs to wait, then we're going to have to wait, and we need to figure out how we're going to train once we get them here. And really, we'll get a lot of direction about that from the medical community once they figure out what the best way to approach that is, because we certainly want to make our player health and safety the most important thing, knowing what we're operating under. But in the meantime, we can figure out, social distancing in our building, which, seems like if we were a bank, it wouldn't be that difficult, but it's awfully hard to meet with 90 players and exist in a locker room and a weight room and practice the game of football while social distancing. So there's going to be a lot of adjusting. There's going to be some probably new rules in place for practice and training that we're going to have to figure out how to work around, not work around, but work with. And there's a lot of information that we just don't have yet. And as far as when it's going to happen, I don't know. But I do think I know our league office and the union and the players, they're going to do everything they can. If we have to go to the moon, they'll probably try and figure out a way to get us to the moon to play football, because our fans really want to see it. Players want to play. No one wants to lose a year of their career. Obviously, we want to play as well. So if it can be done, it'll be done. But I also know the people that are in charge, they're only going to do it if it's the right thing to do. And, we'll find out when we find out. And I've heard all different versions of how it'll work for fans in the stands. I've heard it could be none. I've heard it could be a small group. It could be, sort of an intermediate sized group. What I don't think it'll be is it's not going to be a capacity stadium. They're going to have to figure out how to space fans out, just like we're being spaced out in every other area of our lives. It's not going to be different than the fan experience at a stadium. So those are things that medical community and league and union are trying to sort out, and it's complicated. I mean, the fact that they've gotten us this far down the road on what we need to do and what we will be doing is pretty impressive. I can't imagine what the days are like right now at the league office and at the union, and certainly in the within the medical community, as they're trying to sort out how to return to football in this day and age. And hello, Jeremy. Jeremy's a good friend from back in Toronto, so interesting that he signed in today.
So how do you think the players and the coaches will react if there are no fans in the stands? I mean, that will take away the home field advantage in some of these, in Arrowhead Stadium, in Lambeau Field, but it'll also be a benefit to the road teams. So how will that affect the game preparation?
Well, I mean, again, at worst, it makes it a level playing field at every game you go to. So if you're losing an advantage at home, you're gaining an advantage on the road. So it really shouldn't have that much of an impact on the outcome of the season. As far as the game day experience, it's going to be weird. I mean, I don't know how much Bundesliga football you've watched recently, but it's weird. It's like watching a practice. I mean, the echoes in the stadiums is strange. The lack of crowd noise. I mean, you can certainly manufacture some. I'm not sure if the league is going to come up with a policy on what kind of noise we can put in to give it a little more of a game day atmosphere, because right now, under normal circumstances, obviously you can't manufacture crowd noise. So, do we change that policy now for what we're going to be operating with, whether we have no fans or a limited number of fans? Do we want to sort of enhance the game day experience? Do we want to make it feel like more of a normal football game for the fans watching on TV? I don't know what the answer is going to be, but it's going to be interesting. But for our players, we'll prepare them as well as we can. I mean, hopefully they've watched some of the sports around the world that have resumed, and then we'll continue to do so they'll get a sense of what it's going to be like. We'll certainly show it to them when they get here. It's going to be different. Everything about this year is different, and that's not going to change anytime soon.
So let's go back to a better year. Let's talk about the first Super Bowl victory over the New England Patriots. That whole playoff run, you were a wild card team, you were on the road, and then you lead up to the Super Bowl where you're playing the 18-0 Patriots. So what was that like? What was the emotional roller coaster of that season like? And of course, winning the game literally on the last drive of the game.
It was certainly it was a phenomenal year for obvious reasons, but it was certainly a roller coaster. I mean, our first two games, we got waxed pretty good by Dallas and Green Bay. We were doing so with the new defensive coordinator and Steve Spagnuolo, who we knew was going to be terrific. But first year on the job, right out of the gate, we struggled a little bit. And then we had a big stop on fourth down goal line situation, week 3 in Washington, which pulled out a victory for us, and that seemed to get us going. Our defense had some confidence. We had a little trouble getting truly into a groove during the season, but I guess there's an old adage, you never want to peak too soon. Well, we certainly didn't do that. But we kept ourselves in the race. We gave ourselves a puncher's chance, and we got into the playoffs as a wild card. And then once to get there, we started to play a little bit better. And then every week in the playoffs, we played a little bit better. And one thing that really was a great springboard for us was the fact that we played week 17 at home against the Patriots. and they were going for the undefeated season. We knew how good they were. Um, and we knew, quite frankly, that if we were to get on a really good run, chances are we were going to see them again in the Super Bowl. And our coaches were terrific. We could have rested everyone and been in the playoffs in exactly the same position, and we decided to play everybody. It was just too important. We weren't going to concede an undefeated season to anybody. The league and the fans deserve better than that. Two, it's just not what our franchise and our head coach at the time, Tom Coughlin, didn't believe in that. Unless someone had a real injury that was in their best interest to save them for a week. And, you know, I don't know this, but you'd have to ask the Patriots. But my guess is they had a little more to play for that week than we did. So we could play loose. We didn't have to show much of our playbook. We just wanted to go and play hard, stay fresh, and to stay in the rhythm. You give players the week off, and sometimes you fall out of rhythm. So that's really what we were trying to accomplish. And at the same time, if we could find out a little bit about them, because they were trying to go undefeated, I think, and I think they probably did show us some things maybe that week that we could take advantage of if we were going to see them again in a month in the Super Bowl, and we did. And I don't know exactly how much it helped us or if it helped us at all, but I think there's a chance that it did. And the fact that we played our guys and they were in the situation they were that week 17 gave us a lot of confidence because we did almost beat them. And maybe it taught us something about the Patriots, who we saw ultimately in the Super Bowl. And the conversations going into that week 17 about resting or playing players, what we were going to try and get out of the game, how hard our guys played. Everyone bought in. No one wanted to take the week off. It was, I think that was, but no one has a great season like that without having, galvanizing moments. And I think that week 17 game really was one of those moments.
It's awesome. So that leads us to another Facebook question, because the quarterback for that team, Eli Manning, won a Super Bowl another 4 years later. So Brian Levy wants to know on whether you think Eli's a first ballot Hall of Famer.
I do, absolutely. I mean, he's a two-time Super Bowl MVP. And I think you have to understand how I mean this. I think he's the greatest athlete in the history of New York City. There might be guys that had, statistically better careers, but I don't know that anyone's handled being the quarterback of the New York Giants, which arguably, Derek Jeter playing shortstop for the Yankees, maybe, but the goalie for the Rangers, the center for the Knicks. But I mean, the quarterback for the New York Giants, that's a unique position. That's why we put the time and effort we did to find Eli when we did, and it's why it was so important that we get Daniel Jones when we did, and then we wait for the right person, because that job is just it's unique and it's unlike any other. And the way that he played and the way he handled that job and the success that he had on the field and his reliability and his durability and the way he represented himself, his family, the franchise. I mean, there's just, the superlatives just, you could go on forever. I mean, I can't speak more highly of a person that I've been around. I mean, he's unflappable. He's close to flawless. I mean, he was raised right, and he acts right, and he does right, and he plays right. He's amazing.
Perfectly. You should be advocating for him in that room.
Yeah, I don't think I need to advocate much. I'd be awful surprised if he doesn't get in first ballot.
So you mentioned how playing for the Giants as their quarterback is an incredibly tough position, just because you're playing in New York City, huge media market. How hard is it for these players to balance their on-field, professionalism, plus all the distractions off the field that New York brings?
Well, I think everyone talks about culture that they want to build in their roster and in their locker room. They talk about background and character that you want when you're drafting players, and that a big part of that certainly is the quality of their citizenship and how they're going to behave when they're in the building and when they're away from the building. But also part of that too is for us is that we want to bring in people that will not survive, but they'll endure, that they'll have some resilience, because it's not going to be a great day every day in New York. There's going to be losses, and there's going to be bad things written about you by a lot of different writers and spoken about by a lot of different commentators. And it's going to happen. It doesn't matter how great you are. Eli Manning, Derek Jeter, those guys get roasted during their times playing in New York City. And, they always come back. And those are the kind of people we're looking for. And I don't know how many Derek Jeters and Eli Mannings you're going to find, but when we're evaluating prospects, a big part of the puzzle is, not just the playing ability and the character and the health and all that, but are they going to be Giants? Are they going to be able to be as successful as they can be in New York? Will they be able to reach their potential in New York? Because, football in the NFL is not for everybody. And if you don't love the game enough, it can be a bit of a soul crushing experience for you, especially, New York City. But if you love the game and you understand that, you don't read the great headlines too often and don't take the bad ones to heart, you'll be just fine. As long as you do your job, play the game like you can and win as often as you can, the backlash and the negative moments, they'll be far and few between, and you'll survive them. But not everyone can do that. I mean, it's harder than people think, and it's an important part of the evaluation process because, again, we've seen it on our roster and in our building. It's just it can be a bit soul crushing, and we think we're doing a pretty good job now of identifying the kind of people that, they know what they're walking into and they can handle it.
Fair enough. So you're saying Pat Hanlon's a very busy man?
Pat Hanlon?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's very busy. He's very busy. He's very loud, but he's our best advocate. I wouldn't want anyone else in his job.
Yeah. For those watching, he's the director of PR. At least he was at the time. I'm not sure he's gotten promoted over the past few years, but the great director of PR for the Giants.
Yeah, he also used to have his own TV show on our website. So that always mystified Tom Coughlin when he got into our building. He looked around and said, "Your PR guy has his own TV show? What the hell's going on?" That doesn't happen anymore. Tom put an end to that.
I'll bet. We actually had one comment asking if Tom Coughlin is a disciplinarian, but I think you just answered that for Cooper.
Yeah.
A couple questions came in about Odell Beckham and that trade. So he was obviously a poster player for the Giants. So what went into trading him, and what do you think of the results thus far?
Well, I mean, I think the trade's been mischaracterized a little bit. I mean, Odell's a terrific young man and a super talent. It's just sometimes relationships. It was, I don't know how badly he wanted to be with us anymore, and I think that we felt like there was good value to be had if we traded him. It wasn't something we were looking to do. I mean, my boss was being very honest when he said early on when there were rumors about a trade because clubs were calling, that we hadn't signed him the contract that we did to trade him. That wasn't our goal, obviously. Ultimately, that contract, I suppose, made him more tradable and his value a little higher. So I guess it had a positive impact on the outcome, but it wasn't why, we certainly didn't sign him to that deal with any intention of trading the player. But it just became clear after a year in a new program with a new GM and a new head coach that I don't know that Odell was going to be happy playing for us. I can't say that for sure. I haven't had a chance to ask him. Of just a sense we had, and then as calls came in, and there was a little chum in the water because people were under the impression that the player was available. That Cleveland called and they made an offer that we thought had enough value to pull the trigger on a trade. So we'll find out if it works out. I mean, he's going to have a hell of a career. I have no doubt about that. I think we did well with the assets we received in return. Now we just have to see how those players develop. And to be honest, I hope Odell does really well. I'm not that concerned about, looking bad because he might have success or the Browns might have success with him. I kind of expect that they will. But I think that for a lot of reasons that aren't what people seem to think it is, I think our chances of having success going forward are probably a little better because of that trade. And we'll find out if we're right.
So speaking of the Browns, there are teams just like them that are perennial underachievers. And then, of course, you have, the Giants, your 2 Super Bowl wins in the 2000s. You have the Patriots, of course, as the prime example. What goes into a team being so consistent and then a team being perennial underachievers? Can you pinpoint something? Is it in the leadership, is the coaching, the players, locker room?
I mean, sometimes these things take on a momentum that it's hard to characterize or quantify. When you see it, you can't necessarily predict it. Certainly, talk about the kind of players that we bring into our program or try to bring into our program. We think that should help you from having those really big ups and downs. But again, we're talking about a big group of people. This is a people business. When you have 25 coaches and 90 players, when you start training camp, and then you whittle that down to 65 players, sorry, once you have your practice squad and your regular season roster, that's a lot of personalities to manage, people to tend to. They're humans. They have bad days. They have injuries. It's tough to keep everyone operating at their optimum levels throughout an entire season. It's a long season, so ebbs and flows are going to happen. You try not to have the downs get too low, and you try and make when you're up a little bit, you try and make sure that it's something you can sustain. But why it happens to such huge degrees in some cases, why are the highs so high and the lows so low, and the consistency just can't be found? It's hard to put to figure out a reason why necessarily. Um, the more you know your players, the longer your program's been in place. Certainly, I think you can identify those peaks and valleys coming maybe a little sooner. Um, but again, they're going to happen. I mean, the best teams in the league are going to have those moments, and you ride out the bad times, try and correct the ship as quickly as possible, and you try and keep the good times going.
Fair enough. That's very well said. So let's bring us back home to Canada. Noah Manley wants to know that the Giants commend you guys for giving CIS players a shot over the years. So with Canadian universities announcing their football season will officially be canceled, what would you advise aspiring pros who might be a long shot for the NFL but risk falling off the NFL radar completely?
Do me a favor and ask that question again. Unfortunately, that call came into my phone while you were talking, and then the connection kind of broke up a little bit.
If it was Eli, you can patch him in.
Yeah. No, it was my 4-year-old. Unfortunately, he won't have much to add to the show right
now. So Noah wants to first of all commend you guys for giving CIS players a shot over the years, and basically, how should players, aspiring pros who might be a long shot for the NFL, who attend Canadian universities, what advice would you give to them?
Well, I think that everyone's paying attention to the CIS now. You're seeing more and more players coming down. It's not just us that are bringing players in for workouts and come to their mini camps and signing them after the draft. And there seems to be at least a couple every year that are in contention to be drafted. So the quality of football up in the CIS is terrific, and it's always has been. It's been a little undervalued for a long, long time. What it lacks a little bit is the competition up and down the roster isn't quite the same. So you're having to watch them, and it's not a knock on Canadian football. It's it's a country with a smaller population and a lesser emphasis on football. So you're not going to see a quarterback play against a defense that is talented on all three levels. You're not going to see a wide receiver challenged every week against top cover corners. You're not going to see offensive linemen facing truly threatening pass rushers or big body interior players that can give them a hard day at the office. You have to look really hard to see those moments when they're doing what they do against competition that really can tell you what they can do if they came down to an NFL camp. So it's a little bit of a harder evaluation, but it's not altogether different than trying to evaluate players from a low level of comp in American college football. You just have to do the work, and I think every club more than ever is looking up in Canada, as they should be. We've had a great experience with the players that we've brought down. We've had a couple opportunities to sign players. Very honestly, we kind of dragged our heels a little bit, wanted to see the players that we had before we made that transition, and then the players from Canada had to make a decision whether or not to pursue the Canadian opportunities that were already bird in the hand, and I applaud them for having done so. But the talent up there is good, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. I think there's the quality of play and the quality of coaching up there must be getting better, the coaching part of it, because they're coming down. They come down ready to participate in an American program, an American pro program. I mean, they don't miss a beat. They give us a great weekend to work when they come to our rookie mini camp. They always compete like hell. Our coaches love them because they pick things up quickly, and again, they give them exactly what we need over that rookie mini camp, and they all put a good foot forward, almost always across the board, surprising pleasantly what the coaches expect. And I think that over time, we're just going to see more and more players coming down and getting opportunities. As for advice I would give them, I don't know that they need any advice from me. I think they're doing things right. I think they're taking advantage of opportunities when they get them. I think that it's got to be in a large part a testament to them that the quality of play up there is getting better and better, along with good coaching. I don't know if they need my advice. If they can somehow get themselves into more all-star games down in the States, that would certainly help. I'd love to see the CIS gather all the film video up there and send it down to our clearinghouse so that more NFL clubs have it. It's happening more and more, but it's not quite the same process that we have with our American colleges. So the film availability isn't quite the same. which would certainly help them. I mean, that's their resume, right? So you'd like to see all the colleges up there treat them like they're MBA students and making sure that they're distributing their grades to all the potential employers on Bay Street.
Mm.
I hope they would start getting us all their film videos so we can watch them and give them proper evaluations. So, I mean, the CIS is good to work with. It's not a knock on them. It's just resources. And, maybe it's the NFL should invest in helping them with that process so that we can get the film, and it'd be great. I think it would help them, and it would help us.
So let's take this to the professional level, CFL football. How come we don't see enough players, or how come there are so few CFLers that are making the transition to the NFL?
I'm not sure that there's not a few. I mean, every year there's a handful of guys that come down. Sometimes it just depends on who's available when. They tend to have multi-year contracts up there, and maybe it's just the timing of players' best year happens to happen when they're in the middle of a 2-year deal. I don't know. The game is a little bit different up there, so not every player translates to what we do down here. But we're always watching. We're always targeting at least 3 to 5 players at the end of every CFL season. So I think the quality coming down from there is pretty good. We haven't had that I can think of. We haven't had another Cameron Wake recently, or going way back a Warren Moon, but it'll happen. It'll keep happening. They're producing good players, and it's a really good opportunity to get another look at players that if they didn't go to the CFL and they didn't make NFL camps, we wouldn't have a chance to see them continue to develop. So it's fantastic. I love that the CFL is up there for a lot of reasons, and that's one that certainly helps me in our job.
Awesome. So we're in Canada. Let's stay international. The NFL's played a bunch of games in London in recent years. This year, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, none are on the schedule. How real is the possibility of NFL expansion overseas, as well as Toronto's featured some NFL games and Mexico City?
I mean, it's a good question. The London one's a tough one to answer, just because I've worked in NFL Europe and London. And I know that the appetite for the game there is real. And I've been there twice with the Giants to play in the last 10 years. And it's always been a great experience. The stadium experience, the crowd, they're terrific. I mean, it's a little bit different. They sort of, the cadence of the game, fan experience and fan noise is a little bit different, but that almost makes it more interesting as a team that's visiting there to play. But thinking about the logistics of running a team for 17 weeks and playing 16 games, 8 of which are on the road in America from London, it's hard to imagine. I mean, certainly it's going to put that club at a bit of a disadvantage. There's no way around that. But how do you carve that up so it's the least disadvantage? And then what does that mean? I mean, are you having that team with an operating facility on the East Coast so that they don't have to cross the ocean every time they have a road game? And if you're doing that, are you separating players and coaches from their families for extended periods of time? And you're really not then, how much you investing into your position within the London community if you do that. So, and then at the same time, if you try and have them do 4-week home stands and then 4-week road stands where they just stay in the States and travel city to city, that's taxing for its own reason. Obviously, the 4-week homestand wouldn't be that bad, but 4 weeks on the road in America, staying in hotels, trying to practice and meet and operate like you normally would if you were in any other city, that would be a challenge. So, and I don't even know that those are suggestions or ideas they're kicking around the league office. I'm just spitballing what might be solutions to a challenging environment to operate in. But I say all that, and I think it's possible. I just don't know that it'll ever be possible while being a completely level playing field. I'd love to see it happen. I mean, I love going to London. I think it would be a phenomenal experience to be part of a team in London. And I think that it would be great for the game for so many different reasons. And a fun challenge. I mean, it would be a challenge, but it'd be a fun one. So I think I hope it happens. I don't get a vote, so no one's asking me for my opinion, but I'd love to see it happen. And as far as Toronto and Mexico, obviously they come with a reduced set of challenges, but challenges nonetheless. I've always thought that Toronto would be a home run as a city for the NFL, but whether it ever happens, I have no idea. Mexico, I've never been to Mexico. I would love to go, but I can't speak much to it. But I do know that people who have been there for football games have said it's a great experience there. So I think they're all great options, and I hope that we continue to push the envelope with our international footprint. And I think it only helps the game, and I think it's fun, it's interesting, and it's great when we take our players on the road for those games, because without having training camps away like we used to in Albany for a month, it's kind of a great team bonding moment to go play these international games and sort of emphasize, hey, we need to be, locked in this week because, this isn't going to be like a normal week, and you kind of get the best out of your players those weeks. And because of what they have to do to overcome what are slightly unique circumstances, it tends to be a bit of a good team building exercise as well. So I'm everything about NFL international games I love. So I'd like to see more of it. And if it ends up being full-time placement of a team internationally, if the league can figure that out, even better.
I think you just announced on the Frontline Access to Maccabi Canada your intention to seek the GM position of any future international team.
No, I love where I am in New York, but I think anyone who got those opportunities to be the first team in those environments and in those cities and in those countries would be amazing.
I know football is actually sort of taking on a life of its own in Israel now. Robert Kraft has put in a lot of resources. He's brought Hall of Famers and member of the Patriots and other NFL players over there every offseason. Have you heard anything about the game in Israel? And what do you think the chances of it taking off in a country that's completely foreign to the NFL?
I don't know much about the NFL efforts or what Mr. Kraft has done over there. I've read about it certainly, and I know that there is a relationship there, but I don't know. Well, I think the NFL sells a lot of places because it's just a terrific game, and I think fans tend to gravitate it for a lot of reasons, no matter how long they've been around it, whether they grew up with it or whether they're late to the game in life. I think people just tend to love the game, whether it's the physicality or the complexity or the environment of a game day, and the fact that our games are once a week kind of lends itself to easy viewership. But I have no doubt that in time will be a very popular sport in Israel. I don't know. I'm not very familiar with how much of it gets played over there, and I don't know currently what their viewership is like, but I think that it wouldn't surprise me if it became a very popular sport in Israel.
We all hope so. I'll hope it'll be a Maccabi game sport one day too. That'll be a lot of fun. So we only have a couple minutes left, so I'll get you out of here with just a couple easy questions. If you can pinpoint the highlight of your career, going back all the way to your internships, to the Super Bowl, to where you're rolling now with the Giants, what would it be?
Well, I mean, the easy answers are Super Bowl victory 1 and Super Bowl victory 2. Those were just phenomenal rides, and you can't win a Super Bowl with having some kind of greatness to a team, and that team was just special. Though both those teams were special. There's a lot of common faces on both of those teams, and everyone says that about the teams that win, and it's true. They were just two special groups of teams, and it was a great experience to be a part of it. And knowing the decisions and all that went into it, it's just a really fascinating ride. Probably more fascinating to me than to others, but it was just really fascinating to see how it all came together. And I do love the process, and it was, hopefully we can replicate that kind of success with a solid process going forward. More minor examples would certainly be getting the job with the Giants. I think there are certain points along your career timeline that you always remember. When I was living in Toronto and was thinking about coaching, but coaching wasn't much of a career in Canada, and had to decide if I was going to law school or was there really a possibility to work in sports. A good family friend was the PR director for the Toronto Blue Jays, Howie Starkman, and he was kind enough to sit down for a few minutes with me and have a cup of coffee, and he gave me some great advice that sort of sent me on my way to taking advantage of a few opportunities that would be a real springboard for me to get better opportunities down the road. And I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do any of the last 21 years without some great advice from him. And those are the kinds of things that you remember, and there's been a lot of luck involved to be with the Giants. Just the fact that I happen to answer phone calls and be in the right place at the right time and speak to the right person at the right moment, those kinds of things happen. I mean, it's luck is a real thing, and I've certainly had my share of it. So those are moments that you remember as well. But winning the 2 championships, obviously, I don't know that anything will ever top that. Being able to share those moments with family and friends certainly were massive, and desperately trying to do it again.
Of course. And since not all of us are lucky enough to have a cup of coffee with you, what advice can you share with the young athletes that are watching today who want to break into a career in sports?
Working for a club beyond the playing field?
Yeah, in the front office.
Yeah, I think that one's easy. I mean, compared to 25 years ago, and this isn't meant to come off as you guys don't know how good you have it. I'm says the old man kind of thing. But in 2020, there is so much information out there. The internet provides. You can give yourself your own graduate degree in sports management right now if you just take the time to search for it online. And there are so many good resources. There's some bad ones too. So your BS detector better be pretty good. But you can get so much information and get so familiar with the industry that you're trying to break into, which isn't like other industries. I mean, if you want to work on Bay Street, you go get your MBA. If you want to be a lawyer, you go to law school. You want to be a doctor, you go to med school. There isn't quite that illuminated career path for working in sports. But the good news is that compared to 25 years ago when there was no internet, there's so much information at your fingertips, and it almost gives you the equivalent of going through those academic programs to prepare you for job interviews and identifying what it is you truly want to do, or what it is you don't want to do, which is as important to figure out as what you do want to do. So, and every time you get on a phone with someone, if I didn't know the first thing about Howie Starkman except for what my dad had told me because he knew Howie a little bit. But if I didn't have that little bit of background information on him through someone who knew him firsthand, I would have gone into that not knowing anything, which doesn't make for much of a conversation or a job interview if it had been one of those. But now you can go into every conversation knowing something about who you're talking to, about the organization that you're talking about, and the positions that you're looking to, that they are your end game and your goal. You can know more about it, how organizations work. You can read about, if you want to be a scout, there's all kinds of online material and courses about scouting. If you want to know more about the salary cap, there's all kinds of information out there. If you want to be into data analytics, there's no shortage of data analytics information and websites and people to follow and books to read. It is an unlimited resource out there, or resources are unlimited out there. And it's really, as long as you're willing to do the work, and quite honestly, shame on you if you don't, you can get such a leg up on your career just by doing a little bit of work, researching information that I would think you already have a passion to learn about.
Perfect advice. So, Kevin, before I let you go, thank you again so much for your time. It was an incredible hour. I learned a lot. Fascinating. I can talk to you for hours and hours. So, any last words before we let you go?
No, it's been a pleasure to be here. I miss my home in Canada. I'm a New Yorker now, raising New York kids, but Canada's always going to be home. It's great to participate. Really glad that I was introduced to you guys and had the opportunity to speak to you tonight. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time, and have a great night.
Thank you, you too.